All right, so yeah, divine beasts.
The divine beast. So first off, Ben, kind of set it up for me. Why do we want to focus on this one aspect?
Well, I think it's a pretty important point for the series being dungeons, and these, they're called divine beasts. I mean, in Zelda, they're not ever really called dungeons. It's more likely to be called a temple in game. It's kind of dungeons is a fan thing or like just a reference point. So I would still call the divine beast dungeons just because they serve that purpose to me,
Yeah.
and they fit the game really well. Some part of me misses these giant labyrinthian like kind of puzzle boxes
Yeah.
of past Zelda games.
Because it is very different.
It is very different and like something where the shrines, yeah, they satisfy that to some degree, and I the shrines are a lot of fun to do, but there's still like that in between piece
Yeah.
of just a classic Zelda dungeon, and I think the departure is a really good choice, but I wouldn't be opposed to seeing like a giant temple with block
Yeah.
puzzles in the future.
And I think you hit the nail right on the head there, which is that they are one. It's such a shift in the dynamic of how the Zelda games played, which I agree. It's a very good thing. I think for the game, the story it's trying to tell in the world, it makes so much sense. They're very, for the most part, I think they're very well executed, and among other things. But there is a dialogue to be had about like, but could you bring some of that design back in? Like, cause I feel the same way. I do miss the old school Zelda dungeon design, and we were talking about this a bit. I actually was having a conversation though with my buddy last Friday who likes the game. He actually loves the game a good amount, but he was having some issues with that part, particularly because he is a pretty big. It's my friend Dan Scartapane. I believe I've actually brought him up a couple times on the podcast. He's a big Zelda guy. He's played through most of the games. He was having some trouble adjusting to Breath of the Wild, and I know that was one of the things that even now he was still saying he did kind of miss the old school dungeon design. And I know we were already kind of having this conversation, so I don't know. Do you think say because we've already kind of talked about this? They have said Anuma basically said that like, well, we have the assets developed. Obviously, we're going to want to shorten the development time. So look, let's face it. Not let's face it. But same way that with Ocarina, the game Breath of the Wild has fundamentally changed the gameplay type of a Zelda game. I really can't see them going back to the old traditional style in every sense, but I can see elements maybe creeping back in. Like I was actually listening to another podcast like right around the time the game came out, and they were suggesting that for a sequel, maybe you could get a game that's a little bit of a smaller world, still have that exploration element, maybe not quite so much of the empty space, and bring back those like traditional Zelda type dungeons. So how would you feel about something like that, Ben?
I think I feel pretty good. I like that idea of finding the happy medium, and I think the purpose of Breath of the Wild was to make a clean break from everything. And like they've
Absolutely.
said from the beginning of development that breaking the conventions of Zelda was a main point of the game. So I think succeeding in that and it working out well gives them freedom to explore going back to some of the old traditions while not leaning on them as a crutch as they started to do.
Yeah, and I mean that is the thing. There is a lot of room to in that middle ground before you get to that point. Because first off, I think I don't want to make this sound negative. We both love the game, and I like a lot of the changes. Again, maybe it's because I've played a good amount of Zelda games, as you guys know from listening to the podcast, but I'm maybe not quite as well versed as someone like Ben or my friend Dan Scartapane is. Maybe I'm a little bit less tied to those things, but I love how open and big the world is. I love that it's not a world that it's packed with things to do, but it doesn't feel like it is in like the Ubisoft sense. It's not like the world doesn't feel like it's empty space to the next thing. It feels like a real world. I mean, it could get a little bit smaller and things like that, and I think it could still work. But
I think a good analogy is the art style of Zelda,
yeah,
because if you think about the Wind Waker and how that was a huge departure and like super cartoony, and it was very divisive at the time.
yes,
And then they went back to Twilight Princess, which is as realistic as they could possibly do.
hmm,
And then you get Skyward Sword after that, which is the happy medium
yes.
of like the realism and super
Well,
cartoony.
even this game is a continuation of that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so I'm thinking they usually go that route of doing something crazy left field, doing something crazy right field, and then finding a happy medium.
That's true. So if Skyward Sword was right field and this is left, I definitely think we're going to find a nice medium. And
Yeah,
knowing Nintendo and seeing just how they took all the criticism for Skyward Sword into account, I'm sure they're going to be listening to the feedback. We're kind of talking more general now, getting back into the Divine Beast in particular.
yeah,
Just to kind of go over it, I know my friend had criticisms, and I've seen these criticisms echoed online. Just kind of going through them. A lot of people don't like, and this actually goes into the shrines too. They don't like that it's basically all just the same room, and that the divine beasts are the same. A lot of people seem to be bothered by the fact that, unlike the Zelda dungeons of yore, there's no difference in aesthetics or theme.
the
They're all,
aesthetics. Yeah,
yeah,
I can get that. How you all have that. They all have that beige. Once you're inside it,
yeah,
it's just that the beige with the neon stripes and stuff that
yeah.
like I think I forget they said I saw in one of the interviews they said it's based on a specific Japanese era from
Oh,
from history, the whole art style of like the shrines and the those like they look like squiggly
I
like
remember what you're talking
stuff. Yeah.
about. Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I can get the aesthetic thing where you want some variety, but I that just goes back to the point that the variety is in the open world,
exactly.
and they put really all like everything missing that would be in a dungeon, like mini bosses are in the open world, puzzles they're all in the open world. Like they just kept these dungeons. It's like a 2 hour session of just finding these pedestals
Hmm.
to scan your Sheikah slate on, and so it's basically just 5 puzzles,
That's true.
and
And I
but they all
guess
have this mechanic of rotating the entire dungeon.
you're right. And everyone is, because I guess the thing for me is, I don't know if the dungeon itself is, I guess it can be 2 hours. I feel like I've done them sooner, but the whole process of, normally you have to do something to get up to the divine beast. There's like a boss section of you getting into it. You obviously have a boss fight, and the dungeon itself. Yeah, it's like 2 hours of game time by the
Yeah,
time you're done.
but my point actually about the 2 hours was that that's on the short side for a dungeon.
That
Like
that
maybe I take my time or what, but
that's true for like a dungeon in like the old school Zeldas. That still is pretty like,
I would say up to 4 hours I would take in a like Twilight Princess dungeon.
oh yeah.
That's a deep sink right there.
Well, I mean, that was what did me in when I was trying to do the playthrough before this game came out. I forgot just how much time you spend in every dungeon and how much time you have to sink into the puzzles and all this stuff. And look, I think in a lot of ways it was smart to go a different route. One, because they still do feel in depth, don't get me wrong, but like they do feel a little bit more manageable. They don't feel quite that way. And when you're already in this big open world where the world itself is kind of in a lot of ways, there's puzzles in the open world. There's just traversal is a puzzle in of itself sometimes.
Yeah,
Having these things be a little bit more manageable makes sense in the world that they created, and having a unifying theme around the shrines and the divine beast, it makes sense from a narrative perspective and world building, but it also just helps unifying them around a theme. Like there's an area where you do puzzles as opposed to the open world.
yeah. Instead of having a grass dungeon and an ice dungeon, the dungeons themselves are a theme of the game.
Yes.
Not like each dungeon has a theme to itself.
Exactly. They're all unified under one theme now, which I don't think is bad. I even think in the future, even if future Zelda games have more traditionally designed dungeons, I wouldn't mind if aesthetically they're all unified by a theme still.
Yeah, and it feels cohesive in the world, and like you said, it really complements the story and the world building. And yeah, it's just they are what they are, and they work really well for the game. And I guess they don't need to be dungeons. And I also wouldn't be surprised if the next game doesn't even take that like the half measure combination approach, but just does another new thing, you know, and it just becomes this like the the story and gameplay informs what a quote unquote dungeon is instead of saying, oh, we have to have the meat of the game be these puzzle
Yeah.
labyrinth dungeons
No, that's
that themed around fire, whatever.
no. You bring up a very good point there, Ben. I think you're right. It makes a lot more sense, and that cohesion is so much more important because you're right. If it was just these differently themed things on top of this world, that the world in and of itself is so varied and so diverse, and then you have these dungeons with these different themes, it would be almost a little overwhelming. There's something about it, about the unit, about that unification that's nice. It kind of does work on this level to make you understand. I'm doing puzzles now. I'm doing this now. Like I'm in a certain area of the game. And then obviously, technically speaking, from a processing standpoint, when they're already doing this giant open world, it just makes sense. It really does, because to have these things be a little bit less taxing on the system, although they all exist as their own separate spot. They're not like part of the open world. You do load into a separate map.
Yeah, although it does do a good job of making you feel like it's just part of the world.
Yeah.
I think when you're in the Divine Beast or just like on top of it, looking around,
Yes.
obviously you're loaded somewhere else, but it's really easy for me at least to forget that. The illusion is really done really well in having the open air feeling transfer to when you're in a beast.
I agree, because even in those dungeons themselves, like there's ways you can use your skills. There
Yeah,
still is experimentation in them. Like,
and there's like enough of the loading zone around you, like in
yes.
the air, so you can kind of like fly around. You could jump off
Yeah.
and like fly to a lower level and manipulate everything from the outside, which really isn't done. Like some of the past Zelda dungeons, you might go outside and it's like a balcony,
Yeah.
and then you come back in. You
Yes.
never get to like jump off the dungeon and just climb up to another window.
No. Or use one of your abilities to float on a gust of wind and shoot up onto like the top level or anything. Like you're
Yeah,
never
you really have all your tools to manipulate.
exactly. And then too, there's something really cool about the fact that every beast itself has something you can manipulate. Like, like it's a trunk, or you can, if it's the flying one, you can change how it flies. We're obviously not going into names and specifics here. I think in part that's because, at least off the top of my head, I can't remember every name, but um, I don't know. I like all those things. I like all those aspects, and they don't bother
And you
me.
still get your epic boss fight in a heart container.
I I would say so far, the last one I did, I most recently did. I think it's Van Meadow. I don't think that's the
Yeah,
right one.
just say what area.
The camel one. That's
The desert.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. The one that's in the Gerudo Desert. I did that one. I really liked it. Actually, my friend Dan Scartapane hated it. He just did it
Really?
this weekend too. I think it was the best. Well, I actually still think that November is the first one. It's the elephant. That's my favorite one in terms of the puzzles.
Hmm.
But the best boss fight was in the one I just did. That was incredible.
That was I would agree. That's the best boss fight.
Yes,
I think my favorite overall was the flying one.
I really like that one too.
Um, that's just personal. Personally, I always like the sky dungeons or whatever. Like in a game, that aspect appeals to me. Just flying, and
Yeah.
the way you entered the flying one was the coolest one of those to
Oh,
me.
that was so great. I love that.
Um,
They've all had pretty great, like the entering segment where you kind of
yeah,
team up with like the new person who's kind of the more or less like the new analogy for the champion in their generation,
yeah,
and you have to get onto it. They're all so thrilling.
yeah. It is kind of interesting story wise. I just thought that you're interacting with the descendants of your
Yeah,
past friends,
yeah.
but you don't have a descendant. You just were
You
asleep for 100 years.
you are your own descendant in a sense. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's so interesting. Yeah, because I was wondering with this game at the very beginning how it was going to handle that passage of time. I was like, oh, is it just like everyone's is immortal and doesn't age? Then it's like, no, everyone aged. You just didn't.
yeah. You missed a lot.
I wonder what Zelda. Oh God, Zelda's probably old. I didn't even thought about that.
That's a good point.
Oh, well, maybe we should keep playing so we can get to that point.
Definitely.
Definitely.
I'm almost at the point I want to fight Ganon.
How much more? Because you're pretty far. Like you're at like 120 hours. I'm only at like 80 hours. Like when do you think you're gonna call it with this game?
I think it's just I'm gonna get every shrine before I
How close are you?
10 shrines.
Holy shit! I'm like at 60 right now only,
Uh huh.
and I've played. Damn, I gotta get my shrine game up, dude. You're killing me
But
right
now these last 10 are completely elusive. Like I'm looking everywhere. I have no quests left. I don't know what to do.
I have so many side quests still. I still easily. I'm 80 hours into this game, and I easily
Yeah.
have another
I
80
have some
hours.
side quests, just not shrine quests.
Oh, okay.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, I don't really do that many of the. I like the shrine quest way more than the side
Oh
quest.
yeah, because they actually mean something. The side quests are like actually just side quests.
They are, but also
Sometimes you get a dope armor,
yes,
but usually it's just money.
there are rewards. They're also very basic. I feel like there's actually a little bit of narrative and like exploration behind the shrine quests. Like they are satisfying.
Yeah. Only a few of the side quests are very satisfying and developed. A
Yes.
lot of them can be just like characters like, show me an ice rod,
Yeah.
and that's the whole thing.
Although even those they have a certain charm to them. Like they're a
Yeah,
little like there is this monkey kind of like yeah we know this is stupid, but
it's not
that
even that stupid. It's also cool if you just have an ice rod, and it's
yes
like, oh, there you go.
that's true, and you get money for it. Like it does kind of incentivize you to. They, from a gameplay perspective, they work pretty well because it incentivizes you to go out into the world and collect certain things or look for a certain item you haven't,
Yeah,
or if you have the item on you immediately, you get an instant reward and you get a side quest on.
everything intertwines really well,
Yes,
and like making you explore, giving you stuff for exploring that helps you to find new side quests, and then make you explore.
yeah.
It's all great design game. Love it.
Well, the gameplay flow is absolutely spectacular. Um, tell you what though, Ben,
Get the blights.
get the blights. Um, yeah, I agree. Get the blights.
Also, take pictures of the blights. That's my tip.
Oh, I haven't done that, so I will do that.
Well,
I
if you kill them, you gotta.
well, I only have one left, so I'll take a picture of him.
Okay.
So at least I'll get one. Damn. To be fair, I didn't even have it when I took on the first one. I didn't have the ability to take camera pictures yet. Camera pictures.
Fair enough.
Okay, so
Well,
not to say that Zelda doesn't have a really cool story and a really interesting way of characterizing